Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. Hey there, Kate.
Hello, hello.
Hello. We are recording in the middle of summer, and I was just thinking to myself, it feels like a while since you and I have sat down to record an episode.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
So apologies if we're rusty.
Ooh, sorry. And if this is
Buckle
your
up.
first one, please check out others.
Yes.
Well, I think actually this one should go pretty smoothly because this is something we have a lot of experience with as we talk about the difference between contracting and freelance. Excuse me. No, that's it. Oh, there's the rusty. Contracting versus freelancing. I think you and I have both done. Well, we've done contracting, freelancing, and been on staff throughout our career, and we have always had freelance clients. But there is a difference between contracting and freelancing, and it can be really, really beneficial to understand so that our copywriters can explore the full depth and breadth of opportunity.
Yeah. Copywriting is such a flexible career, as you know, and we'll link to the episode about flexibility within copywriting because I think we sometimes limit ourselves to what we know. And often there's a whole world that we don't even know to explore. And I think when it comes to contracting and freelancing, there's obviously misconceptions around which one might be better or which one might fit for what you want. And so we want to clarify all of that so you have probably more opportunities and options than you even realize.
Exactly. I think when I got started, I don't think I understood the difference between the two. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I understood that being on staff was being an employee. I was showing up to their offices, although granted that was back then, and now you can be on staff, be an employee, and not necessarily even have to go into an office. But when I was getting started, being on staff, being an employee meant you were a W-2. That's the form in the States, right? W-2, W-2. I was thank goodness I'm not in charge of taxes at this company. The W-2 employee, which means they take out the taxes. You are employed by them. Like I said previously, it used to be you would have to go into an office. Now there are a lot of companies that you can work on staff, but be remote or be hybrid. But of course, that's only one part of the whole working puzzle. So let's dig into freelancing and contracting.
Yeah. So the place to start, I think, is talking about the similarities between contracting and freelancing before we get into some of the differences. And so the biggest similarity is that with whether you're a contractor or you're a freelancer, you are not an employee of the company that you're working with. So you're not on staff. And the biggest thing I think that this shows up in is that you are typically invoicing your client. You are sending through each month or whatever their schedule is your invoice for the work that you've done, whether it's on a project basis, hourly basis, whatever it might be. And so you're responsible for taking out taxes. So when you're on staff, they take out the taxes for you. You don't have to think about it. As a freelancer and contractor, it's something to think about, but it's super easy. Trust me, if I can do it. I think we have an episode about it or a blog post. We will link to it below. It's a super easy step, but it is a step to consider that's now part of your process.
Yeah, just really think of it in terms of as you get an invoice in, set aside a certain amount for taxes so that when tax time comes, you just take it out of that account and pay your taxes. Yeah.
And it's something to consider too with your freelance and contract rates are going to be higher than they would be if you were on staff. So you should be making more as a freelancer or a contractor because you're not an employee, so they don't have to pay benefits and all of these things. And again, we'll link to the episode we did on creating your own benefits package. Employers usually have a benefits package so that they can pay you less. They can give you all of these things, whether it's healthcare. Yes, we need that depending where you're located, obviously, retirement, but also like perks like gym discounts that you may or may not even use, but it's just a way to have them be able to kind of give you extra perks without including that in your salary. It works for them.
It does. And they get tax write-offs for stuff. Yes, agreed. I think that, and we can get a little bit into it, but the idea of safety, the safety of an on-staff job, and we won't get too far down that road because I know we've talked about the how erroneous it is to assume that being on staff is safer because in a lot of ways, actually controlling your own schedule is safer. Controlling your own client load is safer. But I do think that that's one element of, if I'm on staff, I know that I show up every day and I do my work and the thing is that when you're working with a client long term, whether it's freelance or contracting, you can still get that element of stability to a certain degree, depending on the client and depending on the project. But you don't necessarily have to be, you don't have to make that commitment to be an employee. If you're in a period of your life where you want to experience a lot of different things, work with a lot of different companies, work on a lot of different projects, you might not want to go on staff at a company where you might be limited in the kinds of projects you're working on and the kinds of the kinds of, well, I guess projects. I was going to say clients, but if you are working in-house for one client, you've got one client. But you get a little bit more of that flexibility with both freelancing and contracting as well. You get to work with a bunch of different clients, but if you have, longer term freelance projects or longer term contracts, you can still have that a similar level of I don't want to say dependability, but maybe consistency.
Consistency. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And frankly, the way I think about freelancing and contracting, typically too, if you have multiple freelance clients or multiple contracts, I think it's safer because you're not putting your eggs all in one basket. You are taking control of who you're working with, what projects you're working on. And when you have multiple clients, if a project ends or a client just for whatever reason says, hey, we don't actually need these services at the moment, you're not going from full income to zero. You're
Mm-hmm.
losing, maybe, okay, 10% of my monthly income that I had from this client, I need to replace. That's much easier to do than to replace 100% of your income. So it's such a good feeling when you have all of these different projects going on, and that losing one, or even if you want to let go of one, is more likely what will happen, that you can do that and you have the ability to do that and you're safe to do that. And it's not a risk to paying your bills on time because you have income coming in, and you can easily reach out to new clients and replace that little bit of income that maybe you've decided to let go. Or again, maybe they've moved in a different direction and have different priorities in the company versus you're on staff. They can let you go at any point and then surprise.
Yeah. Well, and on the other side of that too, when you're on staff and you start to not like the job, or
Mhm.
maybe things change and you're reporting to somebody different, or things just, that stuff happens. It's hard to make the decision to leave a job. And certainly our CCA students know they have the skills to be freelancing whenever they want to. They can start up their freelancing relatively quickly if they want to leave a full-time job. But it's that golden handcuffs is the thing. The perception of, oh, it's going to be hard to find health insurance. It's not. It's
Mhm.
really, really not. It's a Google search and you can get yourself all set up. And oh, it's going to be expensive. Like, yeah, it's first of all, in the US, healthcare is just not cheap anyway, regardless of whether they're taking out of your paycheck
Mhm.
beforehand or whether you are paying for it. But as someone who's self-employed, you get to deduct that. You get to deduct those costs. And again, we've talked about, how you can build in vacation time and build in all this other stuff, but it can be, there can be some real downsides to being on staff. And much as we've both had on staff jobs that we've loved, there can be some real downsides where you start to go, you know what, this isn't right for me anymore, but this is my entire salary, or I'm so
Mhm.
used to this. So just wanted to put that out there as well. So some of the similarities between freelancing and contracting, but there are still some big differences. Freelancing is generally a project. Oh, I'm having trouble speaking today. It's generally a project based arrangement where you're working with a client and they say, oh, we have a sales page and 3 emails we're using to drive them to that sales page. Can you do that work for us? And you say, yes, absolutely. You have a discussion. You guys decide how much you're going to charge for it. You guys come into agreement on when the project is due. But largely, once the parameters have been decided on, largely it's going to be up to you to make your own schedule before that deadline. It's going to be up to you to decide when and how you work on it. It's going to be up to you to check in with a client, certainly. But it's between the go date and the end date. A lot of that time is up to you for what hours you're going to work on it, how you're going to do it, all of that kind of thing. And like we said, again, that generally works for projects, whether it's a big project or whether it's a small project. That's more of the freelancing vein.
Yeah. And that's not to say that you might not have multiple projects with that same freelance client. Like once that project ends, you start another one. Actually, all of my freelance clients, that's how kind of our working relationship works, is that it's ongoing work, but each project is its own thing with its own timeline. Occasionally, there are multiple projects at once that I'm managing on my own. But to Nicki's point, it's up to you. They're not saying you have to work 9 to 5. Whereas contracting, you have a contract. And depending what is in that contract and what you've agreed to do, more often than not, I feel like there's, a timeline on it, whether it's 3, 6, 9-month contract. Often these might be to cover maternity leave. Sometimes they're a contract to hire position, which we'll get into, but basically saying, hey, you're going to be on a contract for 90 days, and then we'll reassess. Do we want to continue that contract and re-up it? Do we want to bring you on staff and make you an offer to be a full-time employee? A lot of businesses do that just to kind of make sure it's a good fit for both sides before committing to that offering that on-staff role. So there are variabilities within the length of your contract. But when you're signing a contract, it's for a specified time period. And within that time period, you might be working on multiple different projects. You might be working, if it's a contract with an agency, maybe you were working with multiple different clients. Typically not. They're going to hire you for a specific project, most likely. But it is possible that you might have different clients that you're working at with that agency. So there's a lot of variability in what that is. But that contract is going to dictate how and when you work. And typically, with a contract, it's typically a 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever the hours are. They will be kind of telling you when they need you available. And it's more like you're integrated into the team, which isn't to say as a freelancer, you're not integrated with the team, but it's more on you to schedule those meetings, to share your schedule versus contract. Hey, you're going to be available during these hours that you've agreed to.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily have to be full-time with a contract either. You could have you could have a contract, and obviously you will negotiate this and figure out with a client what works well for you before you sign that contract. But, they may say, we need you for 20 hours a week. And you say, all right, I can be in from 9 to 1, Monday through Friday, or I can do Monday and Tuesday, and then a half a day on Wednesday. You will negotiate with that client, but you will have set hours. And also sometimes too, it depends on the company. Certainly things have changed, especially post-pandemic, but some companies may actually want you to be in the office, and they may want, give you a dedicated desk, give you a place to work. So you're actually in the meeting with people. Again, that has changed a little bit more since the pandemic, where people are more open to you being at your own home. But as much as it's like, I just got out of going into an office. I personally, that element, and not to get too far down this road, but I used to like that part of it because I hadn't made the commitment to work at this new place. So if I made I had a 3-month contract, and if I didn't love it, then it doesn't matter. In 3 months, I'm out of there anyway. But getting into an office, you get to meet new people. You get to go into to a new neighborhood, a new area. You get to it's amazing for networking, amazing, because you get to actually work next to people, and you develop just naturally develop a stronger relationship than you do if you're just meeting every once in a while for meetings on Zoom. I don't want to discount that, because collaborating with people on Zoom is fantastic and beneficial. But being a contractor and that working next to people, working regularly with them while still knowing it doesn't last forever. I clearly have some commitment issues because I loved that element of it. It can be very beneficial. It's a great way to very quickly build your network.
Which is huge because all of those people aren't going to be at that location, even if they're on staff. They're not going to be there forever. They're going to move on to other companies. And so if you have 3 strong connections and they all eventually leave that company, that's 3 potential new company and clients that you have to work with. If they're looking for a copywriter and they're like, oh, we had a great experience, we know a copywriter. Or if you see they've moved to a company, you can reach out to them and say, I'd love to catch up here, learn more about your role. How can I support this? Is there a way to support you in this new role?
Mhm.
It's incredibly beneficial for that sense.
Exactly. And then, as Kate said, this is another scenario where you'll be invoicing them. Maybe it's the end of every other week, maybe it's the end of the month, but you will send them an invoice for the hours you work. But of course, because it's really easy to write those invoices, because it's going to be the same all of those periods of time. The interesting thing is, I definitely have contracted for places where they're like, yeah, we need you for this amount of time. And they sign the contract and you get in there and you're like, oh, you do not need me for this amount of time. You're like, hey, can I do anything? Hey, can I do anything? And then finally there's just nothing to do. You're like, okay, I'm just going to sit at my desk. I'm getting paid for this. I'm bored out of my mind. So I can't wait till this contract is over. But, or you can, of course, negotiate and say, look, I think you need me for less time than you need. Let's re-sign this contract. And I'm going to spend my time doing something else beneficial.
Yeah, thinking about just invoicing too, the way you price your services will vary just slightly between contracting and freelancing. With the contract, again, you're signing a contract. And so typically that'll be either at an hourly rate that you've set and negotiated or at a day rate, which is essentially your hourly rate times 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day or whatever the time number of hours they have allotted in your contract. And so you're kind of set for whatever that time period is. Here's what my rate is going to be for this period. So you really want to think that through to make sure that you are charging your worth and you are not shortchanging yourself, because for the length of that contract, obviously when it's up, you can kind of renegotiate and say, oh, actually, I underpriced my services for the amount of work that I'm doing and what I'm providing to this client. But with freelancing, you can do it certainly on an hourly basis, but more often than not on a project basis. So you're pricing out that project for its entirety to say, okay, I'm providing the sales page. Here's all the work that's going to go into it, all the meetings, the emails that I'm going to write, the writing, obviously, the strategy behind it, all of that, and coming up with your price for that project. So it's a little bit different than contracting. And obviously the next freelance project, you're going to price out on its own, and much easier, much more flexibility, I would say, to change your rates project to project than to say, okay, I have a 9-month contract, 6 months in, I want to change my rate. You don't really have that flexibility to do with contracting.
Exactly. And I want to mention too that if you're someone who thinks that they want an on-staff position, great. Again, all for it. If you're someone who thinks that they want an on-staff position eventually, consider contracting. I will say that I did, gosh, I was going to say dozens, but that might be a little high, maybe at least a dozen contracting roles into people's office, working with them throughout my career. And every single time as my contract has ended, they've asked me if I wanted to come on staff. Now, almost every single time I said no, because again, that commitment issue, I want that flexibility. I want to work with all kinds of different people and go to different places. But contracting can be a really great way to get your foot in the door. If you're willing to be flexible and be open to it, like we said, it gives a company an opportunity to kind of test you out, make sure that you are good at what you do, which of course we know you are, but also make sure that you're a good cultural fit, make sure that you like it as well. But it can be a really great way, like we were saying earlier, kind of temp to permanent. And honestly, too, I think a lot of the places where I contract, they never even said that it was temp to permanent. They never even mentioned that. But as they were getting close to the end of it, they were happy with me, happy with the work, and they offered me the positions. To which I largely said no, but that's all right. It's keep them wanting more. That's my motto. Keep them wanting more.
I guess on the other side of that too, to Nikki's point, if you're interested in a full-time job, definitely look into these. It's a great way to get your foot in the door. But on the other side, if you're like, I absolutely don't want a full-time job, that doesn't mean you should turn down these contract to hire positions, even if it's labeled as such. Because even if it is contract to hire and you're like, I don't want a full-time job, you don't have to accept it when and if they offer it. Cross that bridge when you get to it. But I think the other thing is just allowing yourself to have the opportunity and explore it for what it is, because you
Mhm.
might realize that it's actually a really great fit for you. Maybe the reasons that you don't want a full-time job, or that you want maximum flexibility, you want to work the hours that you want to work, when you want to work, where you want to work. And it might be that this contract allows you to do that more than you realized, or you just really love the people you work with, or you love the work. There's so much that you don't know until you put yourself into the situation and actually
Mhm.
experience it. So I would say, if there's something that intrigues you about the contract to hire or contract in general,
Mhm.
go for it, because
Yeah.
you put yourself out there, you might not get it in the first place. And I think we always limit ourselves and we put roadblocks up and we say, well, we assume we get the job, even though we don't know if we'll get the job. And it makes no sense, because you have more control than you realize. You think just because you apply to something doesn't mean you have to ultimately take it. You have steps along the entire process to say no or say yes or
Mhm.
get more information. And we only have this much information when we're looking at a job posting. We don't
Mhm.
actually know all that much from it. We don't know what the people are like. We haven't interviewed and had a Zoom call with who we're going to be working with to even know if maybe, oh, this opportunity is even cooler than I realized, or maybe it's not, and
Mhm.
it's not what I thought it was. So give yourself the opportunity to get more information, to have these experiences, and then make decisions as you go, versus kind of putting yourself at the end and saying, well, if I'm eventually offered this job and I'm eventually offered a full-time role, I don't want to take it. You don't know that in the moment. And you also don't
Yeah.
know that you're going to be offered it.
Mhm.
So take it one step at a time.
Yeah. And also I would say time passes so quickly.
Yes.
Again, chief commitment phobe, apparently. I remember actually, Kate, I remember this company that Kate and I met at, which was a division of TripAdvisor. Um, I bounced in and out of that company several times. They just
We
kept
joke
calling me
about
to come
Nikki's
back.
3
Yeah.
goodbye
I had
parties
at
that Nikki
least
had.
3 goodbye parties. And I milked each one of them. But the first time that I came in, way, way, way back at the beginning, was to cover their on-staff copywriters' maternity leave.
Mm.
And they had a great maternity leave. Well, maybe not great, but reasonable maternity leave. So they said, how long is the contract for? And they said 3 months. And I went, 3 months. That's so long. But you know what? It passed so quickly. And of course, then she didn't come back and I ended up staying longer. But by then I was really enjoying it and I could still do my other freelance work. But my point is, if you are similar to me and you're like, I don't know if I want to make a commitment to a place for 3 months, oh, friends, 3 months goes by so quickly. And also, too, if you're in a place and you're like, actually, I don't like it, guess what? It's coming to an end and
Mhm.
that time will pass quickly. There is actually one more kind of iteration that I want to make sure we cover, that's actually almost in some ways a hybrid of the two, and that is working on retainer.
Mm.
So working on retainer is, you are again not an employee, but at the same time, a company doesn't decide which hours you're working. Uh, However, they make a contract with you for an amount of hours. And what I mean is, you might work with a company and say, oh, we need you for a variety of different projects. Can we get you on retainer for 15 hours a week? And what that means is that you guarantee that you give them, for a certain amount of money, give and take, you give them, or you set aside 15 hours a week to do their work, obviously within the normal work hours. It's not like they're going to come to you at 3 o'clock on Friday and be like, we're ready to use our 15 hours now. It's within the normal work week. But you have that dedicated time for them and you have that guaranteed income and they have those guaranteed hours with you. Now, I will also say that the way a retainer works is, if they have you for, they've guaranteed you 15 hours worth of payment and you've guaranteed 15 hours worth of work. If they don't have 15 hours worth of work to give you, if they only have 12 hours worth of work to give you that week, they still have to pay you the 15 hours. Now, certainly none of us are in the game to cheat our clients. So sometimes if that happens a lot, you might want to go back and say, look, I think we should only do 10 hours. Or you might, bank a little bit here and there, like, oh, they've been a couple hours under for the past couple of weeks. So you know what? I'm going to give them a couple extra hours here, just in good faith and that kind of thing. But a retainer can be a nice mix of that, in that you have the guaranteed work, but they don't expect you to come into an office. At the same time, though, there is usually a retainer lasts for a certain period of time, like a 6-month retainer or something along those lines, that you can then reevaluate at the end of it. So it's almost kind of a halfway in between the two of them. I think retainers have become much more common over the past 5, maybe even 10 years. I never really did retainers. I was always maybe like a couple, but it was generally a contractor or a freelancer. But there are positives and negatives to it, like with any work opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I think with all of these retainer, contract, freelance, even frankly in-house and on staff positions, whether an agency or within an internal organization, the key with any opportunity is just ask lots of questions and make sure you understand the expectations, and make sure that if you have expectations or things that you want out of the experience, that you're communicating that, because clients might be more willing to work with you than you even realize. So it really comes down to being open and honest and having that conversation, not being afraid to say, well, they really want someone that's, coming in the office 3 days a week and I can only do 2, or whatever it is. And offer that up then. They might say, oh, we really want to work with this person. We're fine then with 2 days a week versus 3, or we're fine with 9 to 1 versus a 9 to 5. And maybe we don't need that much time. And we'll start there and see if we need to add more hours or whatever it is. There's more flexibility than you realize. So don't, again, putting up roadblocks and just making assumptions that what their job posting is a hard and fast, this is exactly what we need and want. Maybe, but you also don't know until you explore it. So get more information, explore every opportunity, ask questions, have the conversation, speak up for what you actually want out of the role, and you might get it.
That's such a great point. I think most people tend to assume that job descriptions are written in stone. It has to be exactly the way it is there. And as someone who has hired people on our team and also for other companies and written these job descriptions, almost never is it written in stone. Almost never. So if you have qualifications that they're not looking for, or you don't have qualifications they are looking for, or the hours that, just like Kate was saying, go for it. Just go for it. But also too, don't sign a contract for something that you obviously don't sign up for something you can't do, but don't sign a contract for something you don't want to do. If you have the contract and you're like, oh, they're looking for 40 hours a week and I really only wanted to work 30, or I really only wanted to work 25. Ask them, and maybe you say, we can try 40 for the first week. I'd like to do 25 after that. If we get the sense that it can all be done in 25, most companies are going to be pleased by your honesty, like, yeah, I don't want to pay you for hours that you're just going to be sitting there. So thank you for letting me know that we can probably get this done in a short period of time, or anything along those lines. But have the conversation. Just have the conversation. Okay, so in a nutshell, what we're saying is that you have so many more opportunities than maybe you even realized. It's not just, I have to be on staff somewhere and I have to go into the office. You could be on staff and maybe you don't go into the office. We actually have a lot of students who are doing their work entirely remotely or even partially remotely. And it's also not just, well, I have to be freelance and I have to do project only and I only talk to clients when I have calls with them, or maybe every once in a while I'll go into their office to have a meeting. Adorable. Meeting in person, adorable. But then there are also these opportunities, the contracting opportunity and the retainer opportunity. And a lot of these can be just very fluid, depending on what you want and need and what your client wants and needs. So have that conversation, because there's a very, very good chance that you can come to an agreement that all of you will be happy with. Okay. So there you have it. Now, start reaching out to clients. Start getting in those rooms. Start talking about what your agreement with them is going to look like. And with that, we will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye, everybody. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe so you never miss a video. And if you're ready to take the first step toward becoming a copywriter yourself, sign up for a free video training right here.